Hello everyone, this is Zoltar and welcome to my Offworld Trading Company Beta 3 patch preview. We're just going to have a nice little look at what's coming in the game just in the next few days, hopefully. Try and get a grasp on these changes so people will be good to go to get back to playing, having a good understanding of what's going on, how the game is shifting and adjusting in this early access phase. So let's just dive right into it. First, we're going to start with something a little bit boring because it's just a nice convenient place to start. The options menu and the various menus. Big first thing to notice here is that we actually have graphics options now. I believe that in the beta 2 build and everything prior to it, our graphics settings were limited to the low, medium, and high, with no real ability to choose any degree of customization and no description whatsoever on what adjusting these graphics settings actually did. So it's kind of nice to have that now, just a nice little bit of polish on top of the game. You'll also notice that our settings have been adjusted into the various categories that they would appropriately fit into. Graphics, audio, and gameplay, containing most of what we've already had access to before. And then finally, there's been a hotkey options menu added where we can, I believe, go ahead and adjust whatever keys we want for buildings. I imagine I'll be using this quite a bit once I've actually settled on nice key layouts because, well, let's be honest, who wants to actually try and hit Shift P to build a patent lab? I mean, come on. Ridiculous. So that'll do it for that options menu. Another nice thing to look at, though, is going to be the custom game menu for multiplayer. If we go ahead and throw up a lobby here. There we go. That should get the point across. We can see that we've got our game rules kind of condensed into this area. And we can see immediately if the game rules are normal. And we can also just, if we go through and we change these rules, let's just throw on a few random things. There you go. We can scroll over and see what the active rules are, and it points out in particular the ones that aren't normally selected. In this case, we've got Reveal Map Tighter Debt, Double Stock, and Daily Challenge on, all of which you wouldn't normally see in a standard game. But for the rules that are changed most frequently, we've still got those available on the front screen, primarily Masquerade, which I turn on literally every game, and then AI players, which some people kind of like to use to fill out their games with just maybe a friend or two when they don't have quite a full complement and they don't want to bother with any other players. Still have map type and map size easily available as well. So it's just a nice, a bit cleaner, a bit bigger chat menu. Still maybe needs a little bit of work done, but overall a significant improvement on things we've had before. So I think that's going to do it with the boring options and menus and so on and so forth. We can see this quick match button does exist, but I don't think we're quite there yet with the game. I don't think it's going to be good to go in Beta 3, so we're just going to kind of pass on over it and hope that, fingers crossed, before too long it shows up. And let's head into an actual game and talk about changes with that instead of all this silly, superfluous nonsense. Alright, I'm just going to start a quick little daily challenge because I know I'll be able to get established fairly quick in that from what I've seen today. So let's get to it. Alright, first thing to note, as we enter this game, there's already something to note. This is a different map from what it was a few hours ago, so never mind. Yes, that's the first thing to note. Second thing to note, my stock price is $7. That's a little bit odd. Beta 2, my stock price would be $5 right now. That would be the base value of my headquarters, $500,000. In this particular case, my HQ is now valued at $700,000. And this is because we're playing in a game with fewer than 8 players. My understanding is if we were in a game with 8 players, my HQ would still be worth $500,000, and I believe it would continue to be worth the same amount as I planted it and upgraded it as it was in Beta 2. However, in games with fewer sets of players, there's literally no iron on this map, your stock price will now be significantly higher. Significantly higher. I mean, huge. Let's go ahead and take a look. I'll go ahead and found scientific. Bam, bam, bam. Steel, down. Look at my stock price right now. I'm getting $840,000 worth of stock price purely from having a level 1 HQ on the board. Much, much higher to buy people in the early stages of the game these days. Which is the intended design of this change, is to allow for games with fewer players to reach later stages, kind of discouraging some of the rush mentality that goes on in games with very few people, allowing people to maybe accumulate a bit more debt, play a bit more aggressively, push more into the late game, with tools like the Offworld Market, the Patent Lab, the Engineering Lab, and so on and so forth from there. Because in games with few players, especially games with just 2 or 3 players, you would notice quite frequently that the game would wrap up very quickly. And you really might not even get to HQ level 5. Some games you might not even get to HQ level 4 that I've seen before. I mean, granted, I've seen games where players win with HQ level 2 with 8 people, but they're few and far between. So the idea of this is to more frequently allow people to explore more of the game, no matter how many players are left in it. That's going to be the basic intent of this stock change. You'll also notice that when I upgraded once again, my stock takes a huge leap for upgrading. This also has the added bonus of making it more valuable to buy out a player, because there were times, at times, when you would see in the late game, maybe a 1 versus 1 versus 1, right? And all players are a little equal. Maybe one of them gets an edge, but he doesn't have enough of an edge to complete a buyout on player number 2 and still survive player number 3's later attack, right? And so it becomes a Mexican standoff. First guy to shoot loses. That's not how you really want the game. So one of the intents of this change, as I understand it, is to allow players to more easily go ahead and complete the buyouts in those later stages by heavily rewarding them by increasing the value of their opponent's headquarters, is the basic idea. So even though the buyout is a bit harder to reach because the stock price is so much higher, it will be significantly more valuable to the player and allow them to potentially survive long enough to get some kind of benefit out of it, so we don't end up in those particular scenarios. Also, along with this idea of increasing use of less frequently used tools in this late stages, in these games with fewer players in them, we'll notice that when we build this patent lab, the build time is not going to be particularly long, and that's not simply because we chose scientific this game. It's because there are 4 players, and in games with low numbers of players, you'll notice that patent research times have been reduced, and in games with high numbers of players, they will be higher. It's just that simple. This basic idea of the patent lab is already a fairly significant commitment in terms of resources, in terms of it takes a claim, and if you make it so that you can at least get the benefit out of that investment earlier, people will be a bit more inclined to use it. We'll see a little bit more variety coming out in these 1 versus 1s, 3, 4-man games, is the basic idea behind this particular change. There are a couple of other big gameplay changes to note. One thing you may have noted, and you can still kind of tell at this point early on, is that resources start significantly more valuable right at the beginning of the game these days. Whereas, I mean, a long time ago, right, water would start at $10 and food at like 20, and I think oxygen and fuel both at 20 as well, right? Maybe steel at 40, all kinds of things like that. That is no longer the case in any way. You'll see that I believe electronics starts at 100, chems and glass both start the game at 80, steel at 60, food, I believe, at 60 as well, and then oxygen and fuel at 40. And the basic idea of this was that you would kind of start to, once people figured the game out, they would start to move into these very basic build orders, where everybody would kind of establish their steel, and they'd establish maybe some aluminum income and just buy up the glass they needed, because glass was pretty cheap and it was kind of a pain to make. So whatever, you just ignore that, you buy the glass, and then you move into reactors because you know those are going to be valuable. And so the idea behind this change is that you will be able to more freely throw down buildings that you think are a good investment, that maybe people will be consuming more of this resource and driving it up in price, rather than simply throwing down the building that is more lucrative in the moment, because there is only one of those, so why would you bother doing anything else, right? You're not going to throw down electronics factories when you know it's going to take 6 years before electronics move to the point where they'll be able to cover their cost. It's just ridiculous. Why would you bother? Now I could throw down an electronics factory right in this moment and have it actually be valuable. So that's the basic idea behind this change, and I think in some ways it accomplishes it fairly well. There are maybe a couple of issues with it, but we'll talk about those at the end of the video when I'm giving my opinion rather than just the facts. Two other big changes to talk about in terms of balance at this point that are really, really huge are, first, farms now only cost 10 glass to make, in addition to their 10 steel price for standard people who aren't scavengers, because I don't want to bother figuring out scavenger with everything else. This makes farms a lot easier to move into. It used to be kind of obvious that the water resource you went into was the extremely valuable reactor, right? Which we can maybe upgrade and throw down a couple of right now. This is what you used to do. You used to just build reactors because they were amazing. They made 1.5 resources once they had all their adjacency bonuses instead of just 1, right? For a standard triangle. It was obvious that you threw down a reactor. It was fantastic. It was always much easier to also move into the reactor instead of the farm, right? I mean, it's just the farm costs 20 glass. Now with its glass cost halved, even with glass being more expensive these days, it'll generally be easier to make that farm transition. Farms are also starting off quite a bit more valuable than they used to be. So it's kind of just pushing you in the direction that maybe you don't have to just go reactors if you're looking for that water resource. Also, this whole time you'll have seen that, well, the reactor has a nice little build animation now, and isn't that just lovely? Always like seeing those nice little bits of polish being added to a game. So, one last big gameplay change, which I guess we can go ahead and do here. Well, as soon as we sell out of the food, we can. Come on, finish the shortage. I'm trying to play the game and talk at the same time. It's ridiculous. I don't know why I bother. Chems, chems, chems. And we'll see right here that chems now only cost half a fuel instead of a whole fuel. This is a significant buff to Chem Labs. A ridiculous buff to Chem Labs. Absolutely fantastic. It's going to make it much, much easier to move into Chem Labs. You can do it much, much faster. Chems maybe won't go up to that ridiculous $200 price just so you can make any kind of profit on them whatsoever, right? Because now if fuel costs $100, well, I can still try and make a little bit of money off chems, and it's not the end of the world. So that's exactly what we're going for with this Chem Lab change. I'm greatly looking forward to it. I'm hoping it helps out the game significantly, buffs chems as a resource, because it was arguably a very, very weak resource in the past. Well, I was kind of hoping there would be a geothermal vent on this map so I could, like, you know, show you guys. I'm pretty sure there were vents on the other daily challenge map that apparently switches over in the middle of the day. I don't really know. But the geotherm, one last thing we can talk about here is that the geotherm has a nice new build animation, lasts for the full 40 seconds. It's kind of cool to see. I enjoy it. I always like, once again, those little bits of polish like on the reactor. And it'd be kind of cool. Another thing to note with the Chem Lab, by the way, is the Chem Lab looks different now. So, yay for that. I like the new Chem Lab better than the old Chem Lab. Always nice to see good things like that happening. Alright, guys. That should go ahead and do it for what we need to take, what we really need to take a look at in-game. So I think at this point, we can go ahead and swap on over to the campaign. Yeah, let's do it. Just get on out of there. We'll start new campaign. And we can go ahead and start it as expansive. Another thing you may have spotted is that the music is more consistently there these days, which is very nice. So, big thing with the campaign. First of all, you have this welcome to the campaign screen, right? It's a nice little thing to have. I mean, it just tells you what you're actually doing here. So that's good for newer players. Especially because those are the people, it seems, that are more likely to do the campaign. They'll be like, oh, I don't want to head into multiplayer and just get destroyed, because I tried that a couple of times. Maybe I'll go try and learn stuff on my own. They go to the campaign, and it's like, hey, here's what you actually do. So it explains the game for people, which is very, very nice. Then we've got our little campaign select. Most of this will look very similar, but once again, more explanations for what's going on, clarifying that the perk reward is for the person who has the most stock at the end of the mission, right? All of these being effectively variations on the 8 days. Game type, you've got colony stock effectively to purchase. So it's nice to have that clarified right there for everybody at the start. Perks still available. One thing you may notice with the perks, however, is that it should no longer be the case that all of these provide the same perk reward. I had a particular campaign a few weeks back where every single campaign mission let me unlock scientific. And I was sitting here going, oh, well, that's not fun. I think it was just 3 missions, but still, all 3 missions unlock scientific. quite frustrating. Another interesting change you will notice for the campaign is that we will no longer have planet-wide events going on for all of the missions. I believe this change is in this particular patch. I don't think it went through for Beta 2. So you won't hit situations where every single map has a dust storm going on. And you started expansive, so screw you, right? Too bad. I guess you should have put a whole bunch of engineers in wind power. Oh well, that's not going to happen to you anymore. You will always be able to find at least a mission that does not have a dust storm on it, from what I understand. In addition to that, wind power is no longer going to be the de facto amazing power for the campaign, because I believe that solar flares can now happen as well, from what I've seen, just kind of poking around here and there. I've seen missions that have solar flare label attached to them instead of the dust storm label attached to them. So you guys may remember the ridiculousness that was permanent solar flares in the campaign, or permanent dust storms in the campaign. Your food production being halved, your power production being halved because you were relying on solar panels. It was quite frustrating. Now, at least, if you were going for solar panels, if you were forced into it because you were doing something like playing expansive, you will sometimes be able to get a benefit off of that, rather than it being almost entirely inferior to your opponent's wind power for the duration of the campaign. So that's very, very nice indeed. Let's see. One more big change to the campaign. I suppose we can go ahead and hop into one of these maps to go ahead and look at it. Let's grab... food production's good. Glass production is good too. Steel production's good. Let's just go with steel for now. Sure, why not? And start mission. See that? See that music? It looped. It was good. Once again, when we actually start the campaign for the first time, it will explain what we're doing in this particular mode. This mode being unique to the campaign, that's kind of nice to have. It tells us about how we're buying into the colony stock effectively, and we're buying buildings and modules to attach to the colony. And the fact that we need to buy both housing and jobs in order to increase the colony's population, and that this will determine how much income we get at the end of the match. All very, very good explanations to have. Well, we already found some iron. Let's just go with it. Figure it out later. We can see that the colony's population is at 1, growing at 19. Food starts more expensive now. I feel like these numbers are going to need to be adjusted, and maybe this was just a bit of an oversight in the campaign. It feels a bit ridiculous that food starts too expensive for the colony to grow. But whatever. You'll notice that now we have habitats instead of housing directly. You know, instead of it being like a housing unit, it's called a habitat. I don't think it was called that before. Still have their slightly increased consumption, but now we don't have a leisure building. We have a workshop, which consumes electronics and glass rather than consuming water and power. Which is kind of nice, because it used to be that in this campaign you could kind of just honestly throw down like water pumps and just buy leisure buildings and then win the game because you drove water up to $300-400, whatever you wanted to. And that was a little bit silly. That was a little bit silly. So now you can't do it anymore. Always nice to have some of those silly things removed from the game. As we can see, we need housing at this point. We could buy a habitat. We're not going to, because frankly it's kind of expensive to push to HQ level 2. When you've taken a ridiculous start like I have, I could have gone for aluminum. It would have been a lot safer, whatever. So we're not going to buy that habitat yet. But that's the biggest change in the campaign gameplay from what I've seen is A, food starts off too expensive. Maybe it shouldn't. B, we have workshops now instead of habitats. So you can a bit more consistently, because you have workshops instead of leisure buildings, because you have those offices and laboratories. One of the things you can do at this point, wow, that went for mega cheap, is kind of specialize into one of these late game resources if you would like to. Like scientists can more naturally go into chems, robotics can naturally go into electronics, expansives can kind of more naturally move into glass even, if they want to. All these kind of simple things, you can kind of specialize into one of those. You don't have to do the one that's best for your colony, but you can. And focus on that, and focus on increasing the consumption of that in particular, in order to maybe find an edge in each of these campaign missions. And I like that a bit better, personally, than the water plays that we were seeing before. And that sort of thing, just based off the leisure building. I think it's a bit more consistent. There's still some variety there in that we have 3 of these end game resources. but it's still a bit more interesting than it used to be, in my opinion. So that should be the big stuff to look at for the campaign. I could go ahead and upgrade, but honestly, it's probably time to get on out of here and take a look at the just a couple of my thoughts on the changes. I guess one more thing to mention, right? I believe that production starts a bit lower for the campaign than it used to for a lot of things. However, that said, engineers that you acquire in the campaign now no longer scale with efficiency. Let's put it that way. They simply scale production, but efficiency is constant based on the number of campaign engineers you have. So actually, I'll just throw down 2 steel mills here or whatever. But what I'll do here is I can kind of put down a glass furnace. We can remember I only had 1 engineer for a glass furnace, so it's producing at half rate. But we can also see that it's consuming half resources than a normal glass furnace would. A standard glass furnace in a skirmish match or a multiplayer game would consume 0.25 oxygen and 1 silicon and produce 0.5 glass. This glass furnace only produces 0.25 glass, but now only consumes 0.125 oxygen, I assume 0.125, and 0.5 silicon. So that's a bit nicer, and it's a bit easier to actually put down some of these buildings that you need to put down, maybe like glass furnaces, because glass has gotten crazy out of control. And it's not just sitting there burning your money the whole time. I mean, it is for me, because I don't have any adjacency bonuses. But you get my point. You get the point. So that should finally go ahead and wrap up the campaign. Let's go ahead and pop on out of here. Oh no, I lost, and now I get an end of turn report, which is fantastic. Love having that as well, just kind of explaining, here's how you ended up at exactly what you had after you screwed up that campaign mission so badly. Oh no. All right. And we can still go through the results and kind of look at stuff that happened last mission. Very, very nice indeed. All right. So let's actually talk the patch for a moment, right? I generally like the direction the patch is going, as I do with almost every patch that hits the game, right? It's one of the nice things about being able to give feedback as a community is generally we can get changes in that we think are good, as long as we can kind of be convincing and show that, hey, we think this is a good change. I think it's a nice idea, this change in particular behind the starting resources being worth more, resources starting more valuable at the beginning of a game. I think it's a nice idea, being able to have all that different production available to you rather than being stuck exactly on those building resources. I'd kind of like to see where the game goes from there. But there is a big concern attached to this for most of the player base from what I've seen, which comes down to the steel production line. You still kind of want to start the game making steel, at least most people do, if you can. But making steel isn't particularly viable at the beginning of the game, because iron can be a bit expensive. Everybody's kind of using little bits and pieces of it to A, throw down their steel mills, and B, throw down their mines, right? So instead you make an iron mine. But it's very difficult to maybe purchase up the expensive steel you need in order to upgrade if all you've got down are iron mines. So it can be a bit sluggish there. And so that really leaves 2 factions on top right as the game gets going, which is the scientific player, who now simply benefits more from his initial bonus, this idea of, oh, well, I can just ignore iron completely if I want to and drop steel immediately, and man, my steel is worth a lot of money. Isn't that just fantastic? And we kind of see that repeated through all the various production that the scientific player has access to, because it's now easier for him to move into those very, very valuable buildings. They're even more valuable, and he kind of has a strong advantage over most players in that regard. And the other player who can maybe keep up with the scientist is the scavenger, due to his ability to kind of ignore that steel production line. He can simply act like a scientist at level 1 and immediately begin going into the resource that actually allows him to upgrade, rather than having to set up a production chain attached to it. We've kind of seen robotic and expansive fall by the wayside for the time being with this patch. Now, I am not 100% confident that Scientific and Scavenger would be considered more powerful at this point. I think they are. It's my gut reaction, but it's possible players haven't figured it out yet, and we'll have to see if they manage to. But that should be known that that is the general high-level community consensus at this point, that Scientific is looking really strong, and we'll have to keep a close eye on that in particular throughout this patch cycle. Everything else, I think I really like. I really like having the new aesthetic stuff. I think I really like the stock changes, the basic idea behind them. Some of the numbers might be a little bit off, but we'll just have to see what happens. And, you know, numbers can always be tweaked, right? It's the idea that's important for the patch in general. So I like the idea behind farms being cheaper. I like the idea behind chems being easier to make. I like the idea behind the increased stock prices. Everything about all this stuff. We're just kind of looking down into the details of the colonies now, and we're going to have to get some more continuous feedback on exactly how all that's going to play out. But so far, things still looking good as we move into Beta 3 for Offworld Trading Company. Once again, with any luck, that will be online in the live version in the next couple of days. If you are too excited that you can't wait, however, there are ways you can access it now by going and adjusting your properties and opting into the next version of Offworld Trading Company in your Steam settings if you would desire to. That is available to you right away. If not, go ahead, wait a couple days. Beta 3 will be the new norm soon enough. I think that just about covers it. Everything I wanted to talk about. This by no means is going to be a comprehensive overview of all the changes in Beta 3, as I don't have access to that. But I did my best to cover what I could. So for now, thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.